Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your growth company. Maybe you're bootstrap, maybe you're VC funded, maybe you're private equity funded. I don't care. You're in the right place, because for the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about scaling and building the people part of your business. I happen to think that's the hardest part. We're about to find out. My guest today is Elizabeth Yin. Elizabeth is general partner at Hustle Fund. Coolest name ever for a fund. But let me tell you briefly about her before she started Hustle Fund, because it gets even better. So she was the CEO, the co-founder of LaunchBit, was an ad tech platform, and that was acquired way back in 2014. From there, she became partner and ran the 500 Startups Accelerator program. You're probably familiar with it, based out in Silicon Valley. And now she's co-founder of HustleCon. We're going to learn about that too, and general partner of Hustle Fund. So she is a hustler. And she's seen this movie over and over and over. She knows the mistakes you're about to make with regard to the people part of your business. So all that said, welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So nice to meet you. Thanks for making the time. So why don't we start with the obvious, kind of, 60 seconds on what is Hustle Fund, what is the Hustle Con, how do those go together, and then we'll kind of spend 20 minutes or so on the people stuff.
Certainly. So Hustle Fund is what I call a pre-seed VC fund. We invest at the earliest stages of a company. And so typically that means that it's a couple of founders and they've built a product and they have a pretty clear idea of the problem they're trying to solve, but probably not much more than that. Generally no employees and no traction.
So you are the first check.
Yes. Or besides maybe your mom. Or your
right.
Friend.
It goes mom, Hustle Fund, Benchmark, and then all the big boys. And I love your website says it so beautifully. We invest in hilariously early startups, which I think is great. So what would be a typical check size?
25,000. If we've never worked with you, 25,000 always.
So I come to you with my idea, my concept. I've got something built, me and John. You give us a check for 25K. And hopefully with that money, we're going to get some product market fit proven, or what are we trying to do?
You probably won't get to product market fit on 25K, although that would be wonderful. But so we're very angel-like, even though we are a fund, we are structurally a fund. We act in an angel-like way. We put in a small check of 25K, but we also do open up our network and help people during what we call a growth project. So it's 4 to 6 weeks, about 1 hour per week, and kind of like a sounding board in this early stage. So we can help you with whatever. If you're struggling with, oh, well, gosh, how can I run an outbound sales process to try to do more customer discovery or something along those lines? Or maybe I'm running some ad tests or something. Things like that are things that we can help with at a very high level. And
this is a fund from limited partners, other investors, or is it your own capital, or how do you kind of structure it?
It's a combination. So I think structurally it's very much like any other VC fund. But I think in terms of who our investor base is, it's largely actually a lot of successful entrepreneurs and tech execs. So I think, even sometimes, like depending on sort of the nuance of the issue at hand or the business, we've even brought in some of our LPs who like to get a little bit more hands-on and have particular knowledge in particular areas, like to work with some of our startups.
Got it. I love it. I totally get it. So you're there almost at the beginning, which is where these founders make a lot of mistakes on the recruiting and culture front, because once you screw that up, you got a problem.
Oh, for sure. And I've certainly done all of that with my own last startup.
I appreciate your candor. Maybe that's a good place to start. Tell us about a mistake. No names mentioned. You don't have to tell us the person or the position, but what went wrong and what might have you seen earlier that could have clued you in that there was a problem? Maybe it was a hiring mistake or something like that.
Oh, I've made lots of hiring mistakes with
you and me both.
And I mean, I think frankly speaking, it's just very hard to hire based on a conversation or a couple of conversations with somebody. Some people just sound really good, but then it's not a good fit either because they're actually not good, or there's something wrong with them, like there's an asshole and they don't quite fit in. Yep. So I've made tons of mistakes at LaunchBit. And I think even just a simple thing is I've hired a lot of people who are not a good fit. And finally, I kind of got wise and just admitted wow, I really don't know how to hire. Maybe what I should do is test with projects or something. Mm-hmm. So can we hire somebody on a contract basis for some specific project for some specific duration, and let's just see how we both like working together. And that actually worked out a lot better with LaunchBit.
So before we go to some examples, have you found over time, or at least at LaunchBit, that most of the mishires were DNA and culture related as opposed to competencies and skills related, or have you made your fair share in both?
Fair share in both.
Okay, got it. So it's not mutually exclusive. So so this concept of a test drive or a job audition project, whatever you want to call it, makes sense. It's brilliant. And by the way, far more accurate than any interview. But how do you get a candidate who's currently got a full-time job, hope they probably do because they like to eat, to be able to invest the time to do this project, this job audition?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a problem that we face, right? Because when you think about it, the best people already have jobs, and they're inundated with a lot of other job offers.
Sure.
So how do you get in that situation? Well, I mean, I think even just a short, sort of a very small, even, it doesn't even have to be, earth shattering for your product or your marketing or whatever, but just like a small project that you do together on like nights and weekends type of format. Just having interactivity over work helps to understand, like, suss out culture. And then of course the work product itself helps to understand skill level.
So is this hours or days? Like what might be hours?
Yeah,
together.
like even a couple of hours.
And what would be an example of something in a matter of hours working with someone that you could figure out that this is not going to work long term?
Yep. So I think for us, there were kind of two categories of people we're trying to hire. There were business hires and then there were technical hires. So for business hires, that's actually where we kind of struggled because, a lot of people, let's just even say, are writers, content writers. Anybody can write.
Yes.
Anybody technically, has the skills to do it.
All you need is a pen.
Yeah, but some people are better at writing than others. Some people are faster at writing than others, and some people are just more interesting in the writing than others. Like they may be grammatically correct, but this is just not an interesting thing to read. So there are a lot of nuances around, let's say, hiring a writer, right? Like somebody may be a good writer for this company, but not a good writer for that company. And that's where I think it is actually hard to hire somebody. When I say I've made mistakes in hiring for skills, it's not that they necessarily have poor skills. Like they could be very good at grammar and very good at writing for another company, but maybe not good at writing for us.
Got it. So it doesn't take much to kind of figure that out when you do a short project together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think an interview is almost too short where it's not quite a project. Like you can certainly ask them questions like, well, how would you think about this? Or ask them to write a paragraph about that. Yeah. But that's not enough of a test. Like, can we actually have a writing project of like, can you write, this ebook or whatever in the next few hours? And what does that work product look like? And what is your thought process and all that?
Paid or unpaid? When the candidate says, I expect you paid, you'll pay them.
Paid. Yeah, it's a gig. You get paid for your work. I think I don't believe in doing things for free. Like this is
you're a venture capitalist. I would expect that you show me the money, right?
So if you're going to ask people to do something very specific as a project, as opposed to like shadowing you in your day or whatever, then maybe that's an unpaid internship. But like if you're going to ask somebody to do work, like I believe in paying for that.
Got it.
So that's one thing. And then on the technical side, like obviously the projects are different, but I think you can chip off of like, a small project. So if you're trying to hire, let's say, a developer, I'm sure there's like some small thing that may not even be core to your product that you need built. So for example, there were definitely projects like even on the marketing side that we needed developer help for, right? Like scraping email addresses or things like that, right? Like API integrations with this or that to get data on this or that. So there are like little things that you can do there that can kind of suss that out.
So now you know how to assess people. Let's figure out where we're going to find them. What do you advise your startups? You work with dozens and dozens of startups, or you have 500 startups. No one's heard of them. Don't have product market fit. Don't have any money. How do they compete with Google and Apple and Amazon for talent?
Yeah, this is where it's hard. So I think that there are a few different strategies that my portfolio companies have successfully used over the years. So the big one these days that's working better and better compared to, let's say, when I was building my company is looking for remote. So remote didn't work so well, like call it 5 to 10 years ago. It was okay. But now I think just partly because the collaboration tools, like we're talking on Zoom right now, Zoom is so good, it doesn't drop at all, ever.
Yeah. It's not like it used to be with Skype and other things. Yeah.
Exactly. And so little things like that have helped a lot. And so a number of my companies have hired remotely. And I think most people, when they think about hiring remote, they think about hiring somebody in another country. But I think even remotely, as applied to even, let's say you have a US company within the 50 states, is something that I'm seeing a lot. I think the more common thing is also then not just building out sort of a spoke model of lots of remote people in different places, but once you get some sort of little bit of mass, like 2 people in one place, then you can have a remote office, which makes it a little easier.
And is the goal there, are you suggesting this for kind of labor cost arbitrage, or just to open up the pool of candidates to a much bigger audience?
Both, and also to win mind share as well. So I have a number of companies who have opened offices in places like Dallas, or actually Dallas has shown up a lot in a number of my companies, or even as far away as in Kathmandu in Nepal. So, and for there, yes, certainly the initial impetus was, okay, let's try to compete better on costs. Like Bay Area costs are so expensive. But also mind share, like you don't have 1,000 companies, whether it's Google or Facebook, like you don't have 1,000 startups chasing after the same people, because there are just not that many companies in those cities.
Sure.
Tech companies.
So fish where the fish are. Go to under-recruited areas.
Yep.
As long as you're open to remote. But you're taking a chance. You never met these people. They could be psychotic. And you're going to have them interacting with customers. I mean, it just seems so nerve-wracking. How do you get past that?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, you have to put a stake in it and take some risk. I would even say that one of my biggest learnings is over the years is, even if you hire people you've known for years, people you've gone to school with, people who look great on resume because they went to this school or that workplace, actually a number of them are not that great, or not necessarily not that great in general. They may be very smart, but not that great of a fit for your company per se. So, for example, I would actually argue that somebody who goes to Google may not be the best fit for your startup, even just from a motivation perspective. Somebody who's going to Google is looking for something that is established. You get paid well, you get to eat free food, you get to go home at this hour or whatever, like all this stuff. And they're not necessarily looking, though, to grow 100x both personally and professionally, potentially, right? But a startup is all of the almost opposite of that.
Yep.
So it's not just about whether somebody's smart or not, or whether they can do the job or not, but also like, what is it they want out of life? And also, what is their mission? Does your startup's mission align better than, say, a Google? Like, I could go and work on the ads platform. And ironically, I mentioned that having ran an ads company, but you could work at the ads platform at Google, get paid a boatload of money, but is that your life's work versus working at, let's say, this health company or whatever?
You really got to drop the attitude and the arrogance and understand what's important to the candidate. They're the customer these days. You're not, right?
Yes.
When we get back to 10% unemployment, you'll be the customer again. But right now, you're not the customer.
Yes. And so really understanding the motivations, this really actually is a sales game more than anything.
Yeah.
Like, why do people buy? Well, why are they going to buy your company, essentially?
Yeah.
Why are they going to work for you?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that, and that just takes time. And unfortunately, like whether it's remote or local. And so unfortunately, I think that's something that founders don't put enough time into, and I get it, because there's just so many other things to do.
Sure. It becomes a just-in-time hiring mindset, right?
Yep. And so I would say that probably, so tip number 1 is I would look remote and outside your circle. But then I think the opposite tip is for people who are very early, like let's say there's only 1 or 2 people, often to compensate for the hiring time, it is easier to try to hire your friend or somebody you've worked with for, hire number 1 or whatever. And that may just be the easier, lower hanging fruit thing to do.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I really wanted to ask you this question. How do you fire a friend? So many entrepreneurs, first place they look, friends and family.
Yes.
You can't fire your family, but you can fire friends, and many founders have to. You've had to do it, I assume.
We're not going to go there, but
okay.
But I understand the Commonwealth.
Okay, so you've seen it happen. And what have you advised these founders to do when they realize, oh boy, we're great friends, but this is not working.
And I would actually say everyone should be prepared that it will not work, because even if your friend who's employee number one is fantastic, likely that person will hit a ceiling. It is actually very hard for somebody to go from like employee number one all the way through an IPO, right?
Sure.
Even founders can't do that.
Almost never happens. Yeah.
And that's in the best case scenario where your company goes incredibly well.
Yeah.
So this conversation is going to happen at some point, whether it's this year or in 6 years. And it's always hard. And I think this is where I think it is really important to set expectations with your friends, the importance of direct communication, and start that from day one. Now, direct communication doesn't mean like just say everything that's top of mind, because that's just more free flow diarrhea that may not be productive.
Yeah, right.
But constructive feedback, I'd say. And unfortunately, that's something that I don't even know if I would say I'm an expert at, and certainly took me years. I would say year one of doing it was like horrible and awkward.
Yeah.
And like it gets easier over time. And I don't have any great advice there. You would have better advice than anyone.
I don't know about that. But I do love what you're saying around setting expectations, kind of setting out the rules for engagement at the beginning, almost like a prenup, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, here's how we're going to communicate. Here's the decisions you're going to make. Here's the ones I'm going to make. Here's what we're going to do when we don't agree. A lot of times I forgot to have those discussions early on.
Yes. And more than that, I would say people don't do it enough with their co-founders.
Yeah, even more important. What is the right number of co-founders?
Oh, I actually don't have an opinion on that. There are a lot of VCs who are adamantly against funding solo founders. We've done that many times, and I actually think that can work out quite well many times. And, you know, there are pros and cons to it. Certainly, it's a harder route. You don't get moral support, and there's just one of you. So in terms of output, it's harder. But later on, when it comes to these conflicts, you don't have conflicts with yourself very often than not.
So maybe it's harder at the beginning, but easier later. So that's interesting. You've done it and had some success with it. What have you observed that other VCs maybe are not willing to get past?
I don't think VC is very data driven. So I think a lot of people latch onto the 3 data points that they have and say, well, it must be this way.
Right.
I think that I come from sort of a unique background into this. I never actually saw myself going into VC, and I would actually even think of myself more as an entrepreneur building a VC.
Got it.
But after LaunchBit, I ended up just serendipitously, like I went to our accelerator that we went through with LaunchBit, 500 startups, and originally, just started like coaching or mentoring startups, ended up staying a lot longer and ended up running their accelerator program. And through that, I mean, I think I just kind of, I don't know, noticed, they have a wealth of data. They have a lot of startups. And so notice that actually there are many ways to build a startup. Like you can have 1 founder, 2 founders. You can have married founders. That's another thing that VCs don't like. But in the 500 startups portfolio, there are a number of companies that are highly successful where there are married founders.
So you can't argue with the data. And the data showed you with 500 startups that you could have 1, 2, 3. Is there ever a number that's too many founders, co-founders?
I suspect there would be. Like 50 co-founders sounds too much. But I mean, I think even something like 7 people would say it's probably a lot in most cases. But then you can always find an example like Infosys, one of the largest companies in India, had 7 co-founders.
And they made it.
So yeah, and the market cap on that is pretty incredible. So I don't know.
I get it. Let's move to culture. This is kind of where I want to spend the last few minutes that we have around DNA. Are there universal DNA characteristics for every hire, every position at every startup, or is it really different at every startup? Are there certain people that you look for almost no matter what the company is actually trying to do?
Yes. So I think as a higher level point, like when you're a startup, you are looking for people who are also somewhat entrepreneurial to hire, which is a little bit of a paradox because you are hiring them and giving them a salary and they report to you.
Right.
But like I said before, actually the person who goes to work for Google, especially these days, is probably not the right fit for your company.
It almost self-selects, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And specifically, the problem with startups is they're chaotic, and your issue isn't really scarcity of money. Your issue is scarcity of time for a whole variety of reasons. And it can correlate with money, but time is actually the thing that everyone is running against. And so you need employees who can work quickly, take initiative, and all these other things that are very startup-like. And I would say that that's the thing that almost every startup needs, regardless of the nuances of their culture.
Got it.
People who can do that.
Got it. It is an interesting dichotomy to think about. We're trying to hire entrepreneurial people, but by definition, entrepreneurs don't take jobs or don't want to take jobs. So it's a pretty unique characteristic of a person that has entrepreneurial tendencies, but either doesn't have an idea, doesn't have the kahunas to go do it, because not everyone has that risk profile, or maybe they're at a point in their life where they just can't, right? That happens too.
Yep.
So in the early stage, you feel those are the people that we're looking for, regardless of role.
They're hard to find because, like you said, it's a weird Goldilocks and the Three Bears problem. You're either too hot or too cold. Like most of those people, if they're really entrepreneurial, they're starting a business. And most of the people, if they're, too much in employee mode, they're really not a good fit.
You really need to kiss a lot of frogs to find them.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. I love what you're doing. I love that you're the first check-in, and I don't just get money. I actually get your wisdom and your team, which I think adds a ton of value at the early stage, because as a founder, I was so lost, right? I didn't know what to do. I was making it up as I went. So I get an expert like you, and clearly you've been very successful. So congratulations. How can people learn more about the fund, get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I'm pretty open. Actually, my email address is elizabeth@hustlefund.vc. So people can just cold email me, and I do respond, although sometimes a little bit slowly. And then I'm also on Twitter. You can look up the Hustle Fund's handle. And then lastly, if people are interested in applying with their startup, we have basically open applications. You do not need a referral in or anything like that. So just fill out the quick form on our website, hustlefund.vc.
Any time of the year. It's not a specific time program.
No got
it. Great. I love it. Congratulations. Thanks again for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.